All right, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. If anyone is by the door and you can just put a word out to people outside that we're beginning the session because we cannot wait any longer, just encourage them to benefit. Inshallah, this will be well worth it. Dr. Ovamir Anjum will be presenting, inshallah azza wa jal, on intellectual pluralism and its impact on political participation is a typo, isn't it? Ah, the cheat sheet, you all have it and I don't. Okay, I've been set up. Keeping things exciting. So, confronting sectarianism, the Islamic renewal and the management of deep differences across the Islamic spectrum. Dr. Ovamir leads our research teams at Yaqeen Institute, in addition to his academic contributions and leadership in his universities, and he is one of the founders of Ummatics. If you do not know what Ummatics is, you do now. Make sure you avail yourselves the very exciting research and developments over the past few years in this in its formative moments. Many great things to come, and one of my very personal tidbits to share about Dr. Ovamir is that he has a phenomenal project translating Ibn al-Qayyim's historic work on Tazkiyah Madarij al-Salikin. Along with his team, he led that project and authored this translation and commentary on the famous work of Imam al-Harawi rahimahullah that Ibn al-Qayyim wrote, one of the greatest books in all of Islamic history on Tazkiyah and most comprehensive. It is translated as the ranks of the divine seekers, if you wish to Google it. And so Ummatics, Yaqeen, Allahumma barik, and this authorship and his professorship at the University of Toledo. I will not take any more of his time. We'll have a 25-minute presentation on confronting sectarianism, followed by our sponsor and a Q&A opportunity. Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh.
الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I want to begin by expressing the great honor I have in speaking to the Mashayikh and the ulama here. I'm humbled, and I am looking forward to your correction and your guidance and your experiences in dealing with the topic that I will be talking about today. I want to express my gratitude to dear brother Sadiq, who trusted me to present this and was very patient with all the delays. I want to begin by praying for our people, our brothers and sisters, our mothers and daughters in Gaza and in Palestine, in Syria, in Kashmir, and elsewhere. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give strength, to give protection, to give nusrah to those struggling for His deen, and give protection and food to our brothers and sisters who are starving, and forgive us for our many limitations. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Confronting sectarianism, Islamic renewal, and the management of deep differences. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to be united. As Muslims, the command, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. It's a command that has two sides of the coin. The command to hold on to the rope of Allah is connected to the command to be jami'an, to be together. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises the stakes by saying, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَّرُوا بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوهُ تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. The disbelievers are each other's patrons and allies. If you also do not do so, you will see fitna and fasad on this earth, great fitna and fasad. And what else do we witness today, if not great fitna and fasad in the land, in our own lands? وأطيعوا الله ورسوله ولا تنازعوا فتفشلوا وتذهب ريحكم. And this is the command that I want to take seriously and analytically today, inshallah. Today we are witnessing a genocide, but I want to raise the stakes and be very honest. We are witnessing the genocide of largely Sunni Muslims in Gaza, which is supported and assisted by quote-unquote Sunni rulers, and it is resisted by Shia powers. Let that sink in. And it is, I argue, made possible by Muslim sectarian division. The Abraham Accords that were signed in 2020, if you look at the process, there's a great book recently came out by Ilham Fakhro, a Bahrainian political analyst. The key reason why the Gulf states turned toward alliance with Israel explicitly in late 2000s, 2006 onward, was because they identified Iran as their #1 enemy and Israel as a result as an ally. So this is not rhetoric, this is policy. So sectarian division, Muslim divisions, is absolutely at the heart of the genocide that we are witnessing today, our inability to do anything about it. So, but at the same time, how do you address the challenge of doctrinal divisions and deviation and heresy within the Ummah? One dear Sheikh, I'm not going to name him, but the reference is provided in my paper. He said, Islam today stands between two projects, the Zionist Crusader project and the Rafidi Safawi project. And Islam has no project of its own. What's interesting is that this dear Sheikh, when he referred to the project of Zionists and Crusaders, he did not call them Jews and Christians. He named only subgroups, identities, ideologies among them. But when he referred to other Muslims, he called them Rafidi Safawi in the worst way possible. And this is a particularly, not a particularly extreme opinion. There are extremes on both sides. And the question is this a fair and accurate thing that Islam, by which he meant Ahl Sunnah, are between these two equally evil projects? Today, I want to look at the phenomenon, the zahira of sectarianism as it has unfolded in history as a general historical issue and through our contemporary experiences and studies in psychology, anthropology, and social sciences, and then apply Islamic guidance to it. So I'm going to identify certain key terms: iftiraq, schism, and sectarianism, ta'ifiyya. Iftiraq is a term that, of course, found within the Islamic lexicon. Ta'ifiyya is a modern translation of this phenomenon, but I'm going to differentiate between just disagreement and schism and sectarianism. So these are three different things. When we think about the problem of schism, iftiraq, and ta'ifiyya, we think primarily of Shia and Sunnah differences. And I'm going to argue that, in fact, that is only a limited view of it. In fact, ta'ifiyya is everywhere. Sectarianism, whether it's between Sufis and Salafis, or Salafis and Ash'aris, or between even Hanafis and Shafi'is, historically, that is. Now it is something that we do not see. But historically, there were times when people came to blows and brawls for these juristic differences. there are differences among and within Hanafis, so the Hanafis between Barelwis and Deobandis, just to motivate the deep, I think, crisis that we face. I went to Pakistan, it was I think 10 years ago, visiting my family, and there was a newspaper item that said that a few Deobandi and Barelwi Hanafis had attended the janaza of a Deobandi alim who had just died. And as you know, people were arranging themselves for the janaza, they asked a Deobandi alim to lead the janaza. But because of that, when the Barelwi ulama heard that a number of Barelwis prayed behind the Deobandi, they declared all of those Barelwi kuffar. Not the Deobandis, because they are already kuffar, but for praying behind the Deobandi, they all became kuffar. And actually, the newspaper item, the news was that all of them had been considered now divorced from their wives. So they had to restate their kalima and remarry their wives. So if you think that this is a far-off problem, or a problem only between Iran and Saudi, that is not correct. You only have to go to social media today to see some of the most horrible things said about each other by Sunni Muslims, many of them trained in different madaris. 90% of what they study is the same. So thinking about then sectarianism is, in my view, an existential need for the Ummah of Islam. And I believe that as students and ulama and imams in the United States, we have a special opportunity and responsibility to address these issues, because in the Muslim world, there is not enough freedom often and resources to champion new ways of resolving these issues in a way that is both true to Islam and at the same time workable as coexistence. Now, I'm going to give you a sense of the scholarship on sectarianism by simplifying it radically and giving you the stages in which any community typically goes through. Sectarianism, the first thing to learn about it, is not limited to religions or to Islam. It's found in all religions, and in fact, it is found in all strongly felt ideologies. You found that the woke, for example, the woke among the left, among the Democrats in the United States, hate each other with such great passion that reminds you of the Khawarij. If you look at the standard studies on sectarianism, they actually often study Marxist groups, the internationalists versus liberal Democrats, and their behavior to understand sectarian behavior. All this to say that this is not an Islamic problem, this is a human problem. Now, the four phases of sectarianism or vis-a-vis sectarianism. First, in any community that comes together early on, there is harmony. When there are no major disagreements, then disagreements and conflicts occur very naturally. The third phase is when those disagreements and conflicts, ikhtilafat, are transformed into something else, which is what we call schism or iftiraq. So there's a difference between ikhtilaf and iftiraq. Iftiraq occurs when one party transgresses against the other and the disagreement becomes deeper such that it cannot be easily resolved. I have the more technical definition in the paper. Number 4 is sectarianism as a culture in which schism is maintained and sustained and nurtured and remembered. People talk about it in their religious sermons, people ritualize it. That difference and hatred of the other is ritualized and memorialized, meaning that it's made part of ceremonies. This is what we call frozen schisms. When you take an iftiraq and you freeze it and you sustain it and you make it a basis of your identity, that is sectarianism. But then often it also happens historically that these sectarianisms are, people move past it, people forget it, they change, they evolve. So it is not something that is there forever. So what is the Islamic guidance in each phase? Really quickly, the first, when you have harmony in any group, you cultivate brotherhood and love actively, meaning do not take it for granted. As Rasulullah ﷺ tells us to avoid suspicion, to exchange gifts, and to, if you like someone, if you love a brother for the sake of Allah, you tell them that, so on and so forth. So these are normal practices. But then in the second phase, when disagreement appears, you have to remember that what joins you, what brings you together, is greater than what separates you. And that is the doctrine of al-wala wal-bara, which is, in fact, has been revived in the recent centuries, but it goes back, and it has also been maligned as an invention of the Wahhabis, but that's actually incorrect. It is one of the earliest, of course, it's there in the Quran, but it's also there in the earliest texts of Aqidah. For example, the very first text of Aqidah attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa has a line that we have wala for every believer to the extent of their iman, and disavowal or separation from them to the extent of their wickedness, and then complete bara'ah from kufr. My point is that this doctrine can be and has been abused. It was abused by the Khawarij, and then it's also used by the Shia. But its essence, which is that its essence actually is uniting, because it says that any person who says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, you have wala toward them. There are certain fundamental rights that belong to them. My point is simply that when disagreement appears, we must emphasize the part that unites us. And if that part is greater in significance than what you disagree about, then that means your wala to that person is greater than your separation. Now, this is a logical thing, and sectarianism, by definition, occurs when you inverse this relationship, when what is less important becomes more important than the kalima that joins you. Now, in the third phase, and of course here the guidance is provided by Surah Al-Hujurat, the very important verse that has been used historically by the ulama, and وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. But this verse suggests and commands us to make islah, and the following verse after that, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمْ. That فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. That it is almost a maintenance thing. You expect that there is going to be conflict and schism, and that you're constantly working to make peace in this phase. Any schism that appears, any iftiraq that appears, you should constantly anticipate it as a practice. So this is going to be my key message, that part of our ilm, part of our ta'aleem, part of our ta'allum as Muslims should be, how do you deal with deep disagreements, ikhtilafat? How do you deal with new disagreements, and how do you deal with old disagreements? The fourth phase is sectarianism. Now, when disagreement becomes sectarianism, some of the old methods cannot work. by giving gifts or saying salam. You still should try to do that, but that is not going to solve the problem if your communities are separate, you do not see each other, do not want to see each other, there is violence and so on. So you need other mechanisms to deal with such disagreements. Now, the best example for this stage when disagreements are, when iftiraq appears, is the example of Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anh, the way he dealt with those who rebelled against him. That you have your rights so long as you do not violate our rights. Just because you're accusing me and disagreeing with me, the ruler, you are not going to be deprived of your rights. Even more developed example, because this occurs after the fitna, is the example of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who actively worked, rahimahullah, to make peace and approach, if you look at his seerah, approach both the Shia, the Ahl al-Bayt, and the Khawarij. In fact, the story in At-Tabari has it that his last dialogue was with the Khawarij, who were fighting his armies, and instead of fighting them, he invited them for a dialogue, and when he spoke to them, he persuaded them. They were persuaded that his position was the correct and they should put down the arms. But then they asked him, what about the person after you? You are an Umayyad, you happen to be a good one. What happens one after? And he said, give me 3 days, and he was poisoned the following day. This is the story in At-Tabari, wallahu alam, but the point is that this shows how the fifth rightly guided Khalifa, Umar ibn al-Aziz, understood how to deal with sectarianism and violence. Now, this is a lot of heavy text. I apologize for that. I'm simply going to repeat some of these things that I have said because they're important. Sectarianism, number one, is not defending the truth is not sectarianism. The most important thing I want to say is that if you want to show this, my doctrine is the true doctrine, this is al-haq, and therefore I have to refute you. Refuting another group is not sectarianism, it's not schism. It can lead to it if it's done in the wrong way. And it can be offensive, but that's not what we are talking about. That's not schism, that's not iftiraq that is prohibited in the Quran. Second, the disagreement does not necessitate schism. Just because you have a disagreement doesn't mean it has to turn into an iftiraq or ta'ifiyya. Furthermore, even when you have political and military conflict, it doesn't lead, and I'm thinking about many examples historically, but I don't have time to give them. You can have political and military conflict and then not lead to sectarianism. Furthermore, schism, iftiraq, is a social phenomenon and not exclusively religious phenomenon. So iftiraq happens from the Quranic perspective when one party or both parties transgressed against each other, when one or both parties violate each other's rights. Again, I provide the ayat and evidence discussion in the paper. But there is a natural pressure among human beings to form cliques. Famous anthropologist Dunbar, he talks about this idea, this Dunbar number, which is 150. When you have more than 150 people in your circle, that's when you max out. More than that, you are likely, if you have many more people, you're likely to form a clique of a smaller number of people, to divide that group, because cognitively it is tempting to limit yourself to a small group of people. It doesn't mean we cannot go beyond that, but you need special mechanisms to do that. But the natural tendency is going to be to form cliques, and as soon as cliques and subgroups form, they begin to identify one group, mine is better than yours, and so on. Theology or ideology often serves as a scaffold or a shelf on which disagreements that are psychological, that may be economic, are placed. I'm not saying theological differences are not important, but that theological differences often provide only a justification for differences. Again, I'm talking about social scientific scholarship on the subject. Now, sectarianism as a culture of frozen schism. That is, when you take a schism, iftiraq, and you sustain it through cultural practices, it becomes sectarianism. And sectarianism, what scholars find, is that it has to be maintained, otherwise people tend to forget it. Meaning that in a new setting, in every new generation, you have to remind people of who your enemies are. And this means it requires agency. It requires often political or religious elite who create and maintain those differences. Here I list differences between defense of truth and sectarianism, but in the interest of time, I am going to get to my proposal, which is managing deep differences. I believe that as an ummah, it is possible and it is our responsibility to manage these differences and make this a part of our learning and our discussion. And I will start with such a proposal by Sheikh Qaradawi, 10 points of Sunni Shia rapprochement, Taqrib al-Madhahib, which he wrote at a time when he was negotiating with and meeting people and ulama in Iran. And over time, he took a different position on that issue. But what is interesting is the recommendations that he made are valid not only for Shia-Sunni issue, but in fact, within the Sunnah, these are important practices. And in the interest of time, I'm going to summarize his position, his recommendations in 3 points. Number one, we need sustained, candid, and goodwill dialogue with all Muslims. Number two, reciprocity, meaning that a relationship of give and take. You avoid offending others, avoiding doing takfir. And of course, the issue of takfir I'm going to deal with later. And you expect that this is how you build a relationship. And finally, solidarity. You express solidarity when someone is suffering, when a need occurs, somebody is attacked, and so on. These are the three things that he recommends, and I'm going to propose that building on that framework, we need to develop managing deep differences as a permanent effort, as a permanent field of study. And I believe that as Ahl Sunnah, we are the majority of Muslims, and alhamdulillah, I believe we are on the haqq. And therefore, we have both the greater responsibility and the greater capacity to reach out and build bridges because Islam benefits from open dialogue and da'wah, and falsehood and sectarianism benefit from manipulation and lies and myth-making that usually comes with propaganda. So, what do we do? Study Muslims' diverse contemporary and historical ideas as well as experiences. So a study of Muslim experience, study of these. Of course, our ulama have the tradition of studying the firaq. That's the very first, so that's just cataloging. But in fact, now modern scholarship on history and in dialogue has made available to us knowledge of what others say. We should study that of course, study that in a way that with the right priority and caution. Second, separate, and this is a key point, separate dialogue and refutation, whether it's Shia and Sunnah or Sufi and Salafi or Hanafi and Shafi'i, separate dialogue from coexistence. So we must do dialogue, and we must engage in that engagement. Sometimes it's refutation, sometimes it's finding of common ground. But the idea of coexistence must be based in what we may call a political or institutional or civic action. An example of that is Muslim Imams coming together and signing a memorandum of understanding that the Sufi and the Salafi and the Sunni and the Shia Mashayikh or Masajid are not going to attack each other, and perhaps do more activities together, and so on. Build long-term trust, so one more, inshallah. Long-term trust through dialogue and institutions. Knowing that just because you go and refute someone, when sectarianism has set in, people do not trust each other. So you need to build that trust before you can engage in education and invest in conflict resolution and peace building as skills. The part that I didn't get to is how I was going to take the example of the Shia as one of, in fact, the main sectarian challenge in Islam, and look at their various doctrines and show how much there is a great internal diversity among various Shia, the 12ers, the 7ers, the Zaydis, the Usulis, the Ikhbaris, and the Ismailis, and so on. And all this to say that there is, in fact, great change historically and today. Final line that I was going to say is that historically many Shia have done takfir of the Sunnah or tafsiq of the Sunnah, but majority of the Usulis today, and this is an increasing opinion, that Sunnah are not only Muslim, but they can even be mu'min. This dialogue, in other words, has led to change. All this to say, not that everything is rosy, but that change and evolution occurs. Wa jazakumullah khairan wa assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Ovamir. May Allah Azza wa Jalla allow us to build on this and take these very practical advices and very serious warnings to heart in our efforts to rebuild our ummah day by day. Allahumma ameen. Say ameen. Jazakallah khairan.